Good afternoon and delighted that you could join us. In this panel, we're going to be exploring how business has managed a way through the pandemic with a specific focus on company purpose and the future of the workplace. And we'll be discussing how to keep employees productive and engaged as both hybrid and virtual working are the norm for the foreseeable future. I'm excited to be joined by Clare Corkish, the Human Resource Director at Vodafone UK, and Margarete McGrath, the Chief Digital Officer at Dell Technologies UK. Welcome, both of you. So, Clare, I wondered if you could kick us off, please, with the first question. So, many people are going to be watching the panel. They're going to be in the process of accelerating their digital transformation. What key takeaways have you gained over the last 6 months, and what are you prioritising at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, at Vodafone UK, I think what we've reflected on, if we look back at the last 6 months, is how critical having the right IT tools was in the first instance when we looked to move everybody to work remotely and very rapidly. So we ended up doing that with a workforce, not only our head office, but also our contact centres and our retail staff. And through the period, we've had really high engagement and high productivity. And to your question on priorities, I mean, the consistent priority has been how do we ensure the safety of our employees whilst we also keep the UK connected through our network. And we've been really able to do so. I mean, incredible amount of hard work, but what's a common theme throughout is the pride in that keeping the UK connected, but a huge amount of effort. And I guess we're really proud when we look back at the last 6 months.
And you've got, around 100,000 people working at Vodafone UK, something like that. How was that?
That's the global number.
The global
number.
We've
got about 10,000 in the UK, so big scale business in the UK at about 10,000.
And how was that transition? Suddenly people working from home in like a couple of weeks you transitioned, or did you have to do it more quickly than that?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we had nearly 100% working from home within 2 weeks. And these are populations that have never traditionally worked from home, and we never believed it was possible, to be fair. So when you say how did we do it, it was about having the right tools and IT kit, shipping those laptops to those employees, and ensuring they were set up in order to serve customers. With retail, we ended up, because when stores were closed through lockdown, this was a population that we also, not only did we equip them, but we retrained them online with training that we hadn't done before, so that during lockdown they could serve customers online. And I mean, that we would never have thought was possible if we'd pre-COVID, that we could not only do it so quickly, but that even thinking of redeploying that population in that way.
It really is quite incredible how quickly people were able to, or organisations were able to adapt and teams were able to adapt. So, Margarete, I'd love to bring you in here. What are the takeaways for you in terms of the last 6 months and your priorities?
Yeah, I think, look, it's to echo a little bit what Clare said. I think the big thing that we've seen is the adaptability for our workforce. We've always been quite remote. So Michael Dell, it's kind of a mantra of having a remote workforce. Although our manufacturing, our R&D functions obviously have been on site. And so the big thing for us has been reprioritising the supply chain, right? So that technology would get to those services, those essential services that needed it most. And actually, we found that having really honest conversations with some of our customers to say we needed to reprioritize some of the technology and the devices to some customers that needed it most because they were an essential service. Those customers responded really well. And so what we've seen is a bit of a shift in our own relationships with customers and clients, that's moved from being a very transactional relationship to being much more transformational because they've realized the dependency on technology. So quite a shift in terms of the workforce has always been fairly remote and fairly agile. But I think in terms of how we've engaged with our customer base, that's changed overnight. And I don't think it'll revert back because we see a much greater reliance now on technology. And that's right across from infrastructure to software and right across the security stack as well. And then I think with our workforce, we've also seen this kind of this unforeseen goodwill that's come forward to say they've wanted to go above and beyond. And so We've seen multidisciplinary teams get together, and we've seen quite a bit of teamwork and collaboration that's been unprecedented to make sure that the lights stay on and our customers can keep going throughout this period. So I don't think we'll revert back to those always. I think all of this has culminated in greater innovation and creativity, which we want to hold on to and almost bottle up for the future to make it sustained.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It just seemed like there are so many learnings that we've had over the last few months where, many organisations are saying, actually, this is the kind of thing we kind of wanted to do all along, and this is the way that we wanted to work all along, and now we're able to because we've proved we can respond to, very, very significant challenges in our organisation in a very positive way. So obviously we've shown that teams are able to do things at enormous speed and with real ambition, and both of you have kind of shared some examples. I'd love to just dig into this a little bit and think about how the way in which things are done in terms of the organisation. Any more examples of that you can share with the audience, Claire? Maybe you could take that.
Yeah, I mean, actually building on what Margarete just said, I think there was no room. It was a great example. No room for organisation silos, so that cross-functional at speed working that we witnessed. I mean, that enabled us. The examples of what that led to for us were things like the rapid response on Nightingale hospitals, pivoting so that we could provide the broadband offers that small businesses needed, and actually a pride in that, and that collective purpose did lead to significant goodwill.
Yeah.
And it's not that people weren't working well before and we weren't a team working set up, but I think the spirit and the level at which people were prepared to go, I think as Margarete said, above and beyond, led to those deliverables. And we're really proud of the responses that were reflecting, I guess, what was going on outside. But it forced us to look very differently as well about what we were going to deliver and for who, even the free data for key workers, for example. So yeah, that would be what I'd highlight. And again, why would we want to go back when you see that level of agility and the output and engagement is an important consideration for us as a learning.
Yeah, and Claire, I was struck by what Margarete said earlier about the relationships changing with clients. Have you seen a deepening in those relationships, both with kind of customers and more generally with vendors and people you're dealing with outside the organisation externally?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Those examples in terms of public, government support and those public customers, we've absolutely partnered in a way. And again, because that common purpose, there've been things they've needed, and we've responded in a way rapidly where it would have taken maybe months, right, to get to a conclusion on how and what the bureaucracy would normally go through. So those partnerships absolutely have been proven to have changed and delivered different outcomes. And with our customers, we've asked them to be respond, and they have very, very effectively. We've saying, well, if we need to work with you online where we can, we've been there for them, and the moment we can safely get back to stores. But they've understood and responded, and I think they've got the message that we are looking to keep everyone connected. We've just had to do it in different ways, so our interaction may have changed over the months in order to serve them.
Margarete, if we could bring you in here, that speed, that acceleration, that ability to do things that maybe we wouldn't have done had there not been these major challenges. Is that something you can kind of talk a little bit about, the way that you're doing things differently now?
Yeah, I think, again, it's just speeded up delivery or decision making, right? It's fast-tracked where we would have spent quite a bit of time talking about the business case, the return on investment, getting everybody consulted around it. We've kind of just moved at speed to keep things going. I also think there's a really interesting nuance that Claire's touching on, which is coming out, which is there's an employee sentiment around when we touch on the purpose of our organisations, and both our organisations are large organisations, but all of our customers as well. When we get back to the basics of what we're all trying to do and achieve here, it really does galvanise employees to be more, I guess, loyal, to be more focused, to drive a greater sense of sentiment and positive sentiment as well. And I think there's a humility that's come out through all of this, either in conversations or dialogues with our customers or our partners and our employees, around the fact that we're all trying to get through this and keep going and pivot business models and adapt. And so we've seen greater goodwill and sentiment and collaboration, unprecedented levels of collaboration, even with competitors that we are now partnering with. And so I think that speed has really come through. And I think there would have been times in the past when we would have delayed, we would have prolonged decisions around innovating in new products and changing product lines and going with local suppliers. And overnight, we've changed that and switched with that. And so I think we want to keep up that kind of agility.
Yeah, I think that agility is such an important word. And Margarete, maybe I can follow up on that. Clearly, we're looking at qualities like agility, like resilience, like openness being really key now to the future of organisations. And even so, many organisations are talking about prioritising those over growth. Do you think it's possible maybe to combine growth with those qualities now that we know are going to be so important for every organisation moving forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think now is the time for kind of a purpose over profit almost. And I'm not saying that we all need to drive a balance sheet and a P&L, but I do think that honest conversation about what are we all here for and the purpose is here to stay. And I think even conversations around sustainability and a green recovery are coming into place. So we've really got back down to what are the values behind every organisation. And I think everybody appreciates that. It's a time for authentic leadership. It's a time for organisations to place greater trust in one another. And, those businesses that are slightly inauthentic are going to be seen very clearly. So I think it is a time for really purpose over profit and the values-based decision-making and leadership at its core, being honest and empathetic, will remain. So I think we're going to see a new dawn in terms of leadership beliefs and culture coming through.
That's really interesting. I think that's something that we've been hearing throughout the day here at Wired Smarter. Claire, your thoughts on this? Purpose over profit, resilience, agility, openness. Are we seeing a whole new sort of series of qualities that every organisation that wants to be successful is going to have?
Yeah, no, I just reinforce the fact, absolutely. And at Vodafone, we've had social contract as a really important thread through our business. What this period has shown is just how much of a force that can be, and the importance of it. I guess everyone feels more than ever. It's real, and I think the word Margarete used, it galvanised everybody, and it will continue to. And I really do believe we'll thrive and grow with that thread and that common purpose and pride, to be honest. I mean, as I said before, it has led to that. When it comes to the openness, I do think it's really important to recognise the amount of, I guess, humility, empathy that has helped get through this time. And I think that leadership trait has been invaluable and again is here to stay, and an important one for us to think about the next phase, how we make sure that we build on that empathy and think about org stamina and resilience for the times ahead.
You've both touched on that shift to remote working. I'd love to get into that a little bit in terms of your team's accomplishments, but also challenges, and how did you overcome them? What surprises did you have in that process? Maybe Claire, you can talk a little bit about that shift that you underwent at Vodafone UK.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was a big shift, and as I said, not one we prepared for. No surprise, the tech and the keeping connected through that technology was the lifeline. And I think we learnt very rapidly how important that was, and we've built over a period of time and evolved the tools to make sure that people can effectively connect with each other across the organisation, and a large one, but also connect well with customers. So we've continued to evolve those tools to make sure we can work effectively, and we will need to continue to invest to make sure we keep apace with the needs. And I do believe it will be a critical platform for us as we now work remotely, and we can kind of innovate and grow through working remotely. And as I said, productivity has been really high, so we're not concerned. I guess it's about how we make sure we respond to the external environment and are ready for the next phase and challenges ahead. I mean, listening as well, using those tools to listen to our employees and what we learned. We were, I think, a very strong culture around communication channels. But through this period, I guess the frequency and using, again, technology, but surveys, regular polls to keep insights really on a big scale, but get those local insights and quickly back to the local teams that they can act on those, and we knew how people felt, what they needed, what tools, in fact, they needed to help them be effective. So that, again, we will continue to do. But I'd say we've moved from a really quite, you look back and it was so, I guess, annual surveys, lots of analytics, but very, centrally done. And suddenly it's all much more instant and decentralised. So that's one of the learnings. And I'm delighted with that. As a new way of working.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about communications in a second. But first of all, Margarete, you mentioned earlier on that Michael Dell is a big proponent of home working. Was the transition largely, smooth because of this, or what did you learn throughout that?
I think actually, he's a remarkable founder in many ways, and he's so accessible. But he wrote a letter, he sent out a note to all employees at the very start of this saying, essentially, flexible work practices the way we go. We've always had remote working, but he's given everybody the license to drive your workplace and drive your work activities around your home life. And he's lived and breathed that all the way through this. And he's done sessions with children, with dogs, with his family home. And so all of the leadership team have really kind of role modeled his sentiment around blending work and home throughout this period. And I think it will continue. So I think that humanness has come through in our organisation. And we've hopefully mirrored that with our engagement with our customers. So I think Claire touched on it. Up until now, communication's been quite systematic with annual surveys and pulse surveys and that kind of thing. And now we've kind of moved much more to human-based interaction. So the sentiment about checking in, but also that human side of leaders that you might not always interact or see has come forward. I also think the element of listening. So we have much more tools accessible to us about listening to employees, about connecting with them in different ways. We have now new forums like yoga forums on a weekly basis, cooking classes to bring your whole family in. So a lot more human-based engagement than perhaps we wouldn't have had before. And I think it's a welcome shift and a welcome change. It brings a level of empathy to the communication. But I do think ultimately we're having to work harder in terms of our connections and our communication because not everything is translated virtually, and a lot of our communication is done by speech, and actually only 10% of our communication is really done through our speech recognition. So kind of watching voice intonation, body language is harder virtually. So we do need to kind of pick up on those nuances on these calls. And I think certainly our founders kind of set the way for us and kind of given us all the license to really connect more on a deeper level with employees and customers. So long may that continue.
Claire, I'd love you to try and build on that if you would, please. I mean, Margarete has mentioned the cooking classes and the online yoga classes. How have you kind of managed to kind of replicate those kind of almost kind of serendipitous moments that are so important within businesses in terms of sparking new ideas or creating new ways of moving forward?
No, it's so absolutely so important. And there is something, we've harnessed through this being remote and in each other's homes, the personal side. So just to build on the humility, the fact that we bring our whole selves has been, I think, really positive. I mean, I'm amazed at the ideas. They haven't come from the top in a way, the things people have done to, I guess, keep connected. We've had virtual cuppa campaigns. I mean, the campaigns are endless. Cookery classes, as you said, just people working really, really creatively to make those connections. And I guess what we've now come into a phase of how do we help people balance as well? Yeah. That without the commute and without the division between work and home. And again, some brilliant creativity coming up around, encouraging each other. Through a wellness program, again, we had and we have amazing tools on wellness, but by people sharing ideas and bringing that to life and saying, in a remote world, how do we make sure we put the priority on these and learn from each other? Taking walks. We're all video. We're delighted to be able to see each other because, to Margarete's point, it's a really important part of our picking up cues. But we've also recognised time away from the screens, meeting effectiveness and just catching up with people as you might go out for a walk and imagine that commute time. So loads of brilliant things. And I think as we go forward, we're looking, we'll have that energy and engagement from people and they will continue to be incredibly creative.
And
really important.
And I'd love to get the thoughts of... Sorry, Margarete, did you want to come in?
No, I was just going to add to Claire's point around the point on balance. I think actually the walks, Claire, and getting a sense of balance, because I think we're all a bit aware that we're on a bit of a hamster wheel here. We could be on back-to-back calls all the time. And so how do we bring a greater sense of balance and look after our own mental health and anxiety through this really dark period that we've been through and are going through? And so it has raised the bar in terms of an honesty and a vulnerability about leaders and employees, about being honest about our well-being and mental health. And I know we just had World Mental Health Day a few days ago, and we've seen all the big corporates kind of take quite a strong stand and a welcome stand on a discussion around mental health and well-being and looking after each other and ourselves. So I think this has been much needed, and it gives us all hope in a time of kind of real tragedy and loss, that actually we're seeing a real shift around leadership and culture and well-being coming through.
And I'm interested to get both of your thoughts, and maybe Claire, you could start on this. Do you think there's been a bit of a shift in expectation now for teams, where teams have proved that they can be productive, they prove they can function, outside of a 9-to-5, workplace, where teams are going to want more autonomy, and that fundamentally things have shifted?
Yeah, and I do, and so there is no going back. I think what we want to recognise is where that experimenting and learning, the agility we've got, how do we harness that and keep it? The autonomy you talked about, that we, I guess, it became more extreme or forced, and we were focused on output and not the maybe usual ways of working. I think it is here to stay. We're really conscious, though, there are things about old ways of working that we might need to bring into the future. So how do you get the best of maybe the autonomy, the lack of commutes, and also recognise the benefits of when we are able to work, I guess, in a more collaborative way, the face-to-face connections, social connections, those corridor moments. So we're really conscious that there's lots to take forward and we must keep. There's also some recognition of what you need to bring into a whole organisation with that new leadership, I guess, focus and real the halo effect of that, as Margarete very well said, that's meant there might be a different tone and a humility, empathy as we go forward.
Margarete, are you seeing a desire for more autonomy from the teams at Dell?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're seeing a bit of a shift in terms of clearer expectations and then letting teams just get on with it and be creative and trusting them. So I think there's a much greater trust in the workforce, and then greater sense of follow-up. So I think, actually performance management structures will change as a result of this. I think decision-making is definitely speeded up. I think we're seeing a room for flatter hierarchies. So those old school hierarchies are getting broken down, because on virtual calls, you can't wait for the most senior person to chime in, or they might have a technology issue, or they might be late. So actually, I think this is a new opportunity to kind of reshape how we engage, how we work collaboratively, and how we drive greater sets of results and outcomes. So yeah, I think lots more autonomy, greater levels of trust, much greater set of expectations up front, and then greater follow-up in terms of kind of just a work pattern coming through.
And Margarete, that kind of like desire for autonomy from teams, the sense in which things have shifted, and there is a desire, I think, for a different kind of leadership, empathetic leadership. Do you think fundamentally the characteristics of successful leaders will have to change moving forward?
I think the time is now for authentic leadership, right? And I think we are seeing that come through. I think those leaders that are really honest and clear and open about where they are and how they're leading their organizations to be purpose-led are the ones that are going to shine out, right? And I think there's a sentiment building with employees around you trust the leader that you believe in and that you have a connection in. And I think it has been hard. And I think the real authentic leaders are the ones that are really kind of demonstrating true values and being authentic. And I think that's going to remain. I think we're also seeing, I think it's shined a light on people that potentially we wouldn't have seen before, that have gone above and beyond and done things very differently and checked in on others when we might not have seen them before. So I think it raises the bar for how we want to shape and lead organisations moving forward. And I think it's a positive thing.
And Claire, how do you see the characteristics of successful leaders moving forward? Have they fundamentally shifted in the last 6 months?
Yeah, and I think we've touched on a number of them. So this transparency and the humility, absolutely. And I think that openness and the empathy that, I think to your point, Margarete, on people we might not have necessarily had the spotlight on. The entire, in our case, the whole organisation, all those key workers, everybody, right, mattered in a moment of kind of collective purpose around connecting. And it's a huge recognition of a big organisation all coming together that the leadership, I guess, had to really recognise. And experimenting and learning with everybody. So nobody had the right answers. So this notion of experimenting, learning and trusting people to do so is, again, I think, important for leaders going forward. So yeah, I think we've touched on a number of them. And navigating the challenges ahead, being able to think about how do you make the organisation resilient and have the stamina for a challenging context equally. Those that leaders people trust are those that can help create some, not necessarily certainty, but keep the communication channels very, very consistent and be honest about what we see coming.
We're pretty much out of time, but I've got one final question for you. Obviously, it's been very clear that you've described very positive shifts that have gone on in both your businesses, and it has been an incredibly productive few months. But it is possible that fatigue and burnout are setting in various organisations. What advice do you have to people, or maybe Margarete, you could take this first. What advice do you have for people out there who are really thinking, okay, we've probably got at least another 6 months of the world being in what it's been like for the last 6 months? How do we reset ourselves? How do we prepare ourselves for this what's going to feel like a long haul through the winter?
I think at the core, I think everybody needs to look after their mental health and well-being, and I think it is finding your friends in work. I think actually it's a lonely place, and I think a lot of people, it hasn't been always easy, and I know we've talked about the positives right now, but a lot of organisations are going through real difficulty, and on a personal level, a lot of people have lost loved ones, and so it has been a really difficult time, but it's also been a galvanizing time for communities. And I think we have seen our work colleagues as now our dear friends. We have seen our bosses as collegiate, collaborative, honest in a way that we may not have seen them before. And I think it's to hold on to that trust and build on it. And I think remember that vulnerability is also a good thing, and being open about where you are in the journey and looking after your well-being and your mental health. And really finding that community in your workplace to keep going. So I think there's a lot for us to be somber about, but I also think there's a lot to be hopeful about. And so looking after your well-being is really key at this time, and helping build that resilience, because every day is a new day and it's not always easy, but we've got to build the stamina to keep going, particularly in these dark and dismal months that lie ahead.
Yeah, good advice. Claire, any thoughts on how we reset for the next 6 months?
I mean, just building on that, I think the idea of making sure we do keep incredibly close to everybody in our teams, and that the community spirit we have within the organisations. It's also through the kind of purpose and social contract. What else are we seeing around us in terms of the communities and how we can make a difference and support broader than our organisation? I think that has to be paramount, as does just having that. I guess excitement about what we talked about before, the best of, look ahead. How do we engage in a future whereby we can think about taking the best of the old and new ways of working and working and engaging each other on what that future looks like and the new opportunities we can harness from it through to kind of have that longer term vision. And with it underlying, there will be ensuring that you're connecting with your teams, and technology solutions will probably be key to that acceleration of how we work through technology as a solve, I think will help a lot of organisations, and making sure that we can connect while remote, but we look at the months ahead, will be critical. But there's no playbook, and I think learnings from the last 6 months and taking those into this next period is a great reflection point for us.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Margarete, for joining us today and sharing your experience with the Wired Smarter audience. It's been really, really interesting to hear about your journey over the last 6 months. And, what would be great is to try and reconvene in the next 6 months and hear about the learnings after that. So thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your experiences. Thank you all for watching, and enjoy the rest of Wired Smarter.